On the 7th of September, I have completed 40 years of age. And to celebrate that, I thought I'd spoil myself with a very special watch. The biggest watch purchase I've ever made so far? A Tudor Ranger. Originally, I wanted this video to be made in a much later date, but because my birthday has already passed, I might as well make it. Before we talk about the Ranger, a quick wrist check. This is something that I got in the mail recently. A very special piece. This is a Soviet-era Vostok Commandersky. It's been restored, serviced, and reloomed by Not a Rolex off of Instagram. It's a small manual wind with a gorgeous amber dial. But more on this piece for another video. Back to the Ranger. Tudor is a sister company to Rolex, established to make a more affordable alternative to their main line of watches. They're still worth a fair bit of change, but think of it this way. You're getting a watch with comparable perks to a Rolex, without the wait list, and for prices relatively more reasonable than a Rolex. Originally, Tudor watches came with Rolex cases and bracelets. Where they differed was internally. The movements were third-party, usually from manufacturers like ETA. Today you could say that Tudor is acting on their own a little more. They have their own movements, and I feel like they're more experimental than their bigger brother. Between 1952 and 1954, there was a British expedition that was dispatched to North Greenland. The team were given Tudor Oyster Princes to test in the harsh climates of Greenland, and the tests they've conducted were used to develop what we now know as the Tudor Ranger. Early versions of the watch were a smaller subset of the Oyster Prince line. There were also some Oyster Princesses with similar dials. Ranger was later released as its own line separate to the Oyster Prince, and Tudor has been very on and off with the availability of the Ranger, discontinuing it and bringing it back every once in a while. This particular model was released in 2022, commemorating the anniversary of this expedition. Early on in my watch collecting, I was a fan of a watch show called About Effing Time. A show I've always described as Watch Top Gear. George Bamford is Jeremy Clarkson, Andrew McCutcheon is Richard Hammond, and Adrian Barker is James May, and the focus of the subject. It's a running joke on the show that Adrian is often called Captain Boring, for his collection mostly consisting of Rolexes. One of his most beloved watches is his 98 model 36mm Rolex Explorer, and despite all the grilling and roasting, he stuck with that watch.
The watch I want to talk about today is the only watch that I own that I actually have a sentimental connection with. I actually didn't like the watch. I thought I was going to make quite a negative video about the watch, and it just didn't turn out that way. The biggest thing that I dislike about the Explorer, the 14270, actually all the Explorers after the 1016, is the dial. I feel like, especially after the 1016, the dial on the 1016 is absolutely gorgeous. The big thing that stands out to me is how curvaceous and how characterful the 369 are on the 1016. Whereas on the 14270 and the 1142, actually on all the Explorers after, the typography of the 369 just seems really boring, really clinical. It's just not nice. When I picked up the watch from Bond Street, I threw it on my wrist, not thinking too much of it. But as I got on the tube to go back to work, there was something about this watch that just clicked. There was something that just felt, I don't know, the negativity about this watch just really started to fade away.
I bring this up for a very specific reason. On one of the episodes where viewers rate the host's personal watches, the hosts picked 5 watches of their own personal collections. When it was Adrian's turn to show his first watch, the other 2 were teasing him because they were expecting the Explorer.
So when I bought this watch, this was supposed to be this was supposed to be my one watch, and that was it.
Explorer 1. We know it.
I was only going to have one watch. This is going to be my daily. This is going to be my one favorite. and when
If
when I
you're
was
preparing
buying
yourself
this,
to be shocked, then unprepare yourself.
Please say it's an Explorer 1. Oh my God, it's not!
So this was supposed to be my daily. It was my daily for a very long time, for about a year, 18 months. And then it suddenly, I've paid about $5,000 for this, and it suddenly jumped up to 10 grand. And I didn't want to wear a 10 grand watch.
Well, I like that more for you than the Explorer.
I wish you wore it more.
Oh, really?
I do.
Yeah, I just want a bit of something from you.
It just doesn't excite me.
The Explorer came next when it was Adrian's turn again. And when he explained the Explorer, something resonated with me.
Literally, the moment I put it on my wrist, it was like love at first sight. And since that day, this has been
one boring thing met another.
No, honestly, all the jokes
Happily ever
work.
after.
But we always talk about watches that make you smile. This doesn't make me smile. When I wore this, honestly, this was significant. When I bought this was £5,000. That was a significant part of my salary.
Yeah.
When it got to £10,000, that was a huge part of my salary. And so I didn't like the fact that I had a Rolex Submariner that was worth £10,000. I've not come from money. I've not had money in the family. And so for me to have something worth this much was absolutely ridiculous. And do I like it because it's a watch, or do I like it because it says something about me? When I put this on, it's just me and my watch.
It feels like it's like, you know that saying, act your wage? This is you acting your wage.
This is me disappearing.
I had a bit of a pause here because I wasn't particularly fond of the Rolex Explorer. Up until this point, at least. But what he said about it made me look at the watch in a different light. I love the idea of a watch that makes you invisible. I think that kind of applies to any watch we wear. In this day and age, no one cares about whatever watch you're wearing. Honestly, for the best. But I do like the idea of indulging in the anonymity. Even with that newly found different perspective on the Explorer, I'm still not entirely crazy about it. There are still things I wish were a little different. Thankfully, we are now spoiled with a lot of options, so I was set looking at alternatives. At the time, I was thinking on a small budget, so micro brands were my first go-to. Both Laurier and Traska have their Explorer analogs, the Falcon and the Summiteer. Both absolutely fantastic watches, but something about them just didn't speak to me as much at the time. I then thought EcoDrive and Citizen. And sure enough, Citizen had a bunch of promising field watches that were not only solar quartz, but came in titanium, something I thought would be perfect for a field watch. Unfortunately, Citizen's offerings were underwhelming. And the one with the closest dial layout to the Explorer? Well, just no. There was a vintage Elgin that caught my eye. It was mostly similar to what the Explorer looked like, but with a salmon dial. It looked very cool, but the problem was that it was vintage. Elgin closed back in the 70s, and I'm definitely not going to put a watch like that through everyday rough and tumble. I was even tempted with a homage from Chinese brand Baltony that had a pretty interesting chocolate dial. But I don't know, all of those kind of missed the point somehow. I'll have to give a shout out to my buddy Maurizio from Ouroboros Timepieces, who offered a very interesting alternative. He has watches that share a lot of elements with Rolex watches, but his watches have an interesting spin where they are kind of aged mostly in the dial and hands area, giving this haunted look following the occult motif of his brand. I was seriously considering his Explorator. I thought it looked particularly cool with the Milgauss style green crystal, but sadly things didn't take me down that path. If I had one of his watches now, it would probably not be given the wrist time it so deserves. There's also a diver in his catalog, and he also told me he's considering including Solito movements in his watches as an option from the default Seiko NH35. So to make it up for him, I thought I'd give his brand a shout out. And if you like what you see here, I will leave a link to his shop down below. Later then, I was browsing Tudor's website, taking a look at the Black Bay because I am considering the 58 in the future. I'm saving that for a different occasion, more on that in a future video. And while I was browsing, I accidentally crossed paths with the Tudor Ranger's page. It had a lot to offer and I really liked the look. I later gave the Tudor Boutique a visit just to try it on and see the watch in the metal. A few months and a birthday later, I paid the boutique another visit, and it's been very difficult to get this watch off my wrist. I think it's a little early to talk about my experience with the Tudor Ranger because I've only had it for, a little over a month. But even at that time, it has already invaded a massive portion of my wrist time. I originally bought this a week before my birthday, and the plan was to leave it in the box up until the day, but that you know very well that wouldn't have happened. I think I will make a follow-up video explaining my experiences in a future date. But there are a few things I could say about this watch right now. When I bought the watch, the boutique gifted me a Tudor cap with the watch. And I think it's absolutely hilarious that the cap has caught the attention of my peers more than the watch itself. And that's mostly because I usually don't wear hats. But I still think it kind of speaks to how unassuming this watch really is. So far it's only been other watch enthusiasts who recognized it and spotted. Can't say it's the watch that has caught the most compliments in the collection, but I guess that's pretty much the point why I got it in the first place. If you have stuck with me until the end of the video, I genuinely thank you for your time. If you do like this video, please show your support for the channel by subscribing, liking, and even commenting down below. Tell me about your birthday watches. If you're 40 or 50, tell me how you celebrated your birthdays, and if you bought any watches to celebrate that life milestone. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.